Back at our desk now, 2 days after the Iran nuclear deal was implemented and Iran began seeing sanctions relief. And Daryl Kimball, why don't you explain what implementation means and what Iran had to do to start seeing this relief that started kicking in on Saturday?
Right, Implementation Day was a big milestone in the course of this agreement. If you remember, back in July, the United States, our allies, and Iran reached the nuclear agreement called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. And since then, they've been going through the steps for formal legal adoption. And after September and October, when the U.S. and Iran cleared the political and legal hurdles, Iran began taking the specific steps to take down its nuclear program capacity to reach this day. So the implementation day means that the International Atomic Energy Agency verified that Iran had completed key steps in 4 main areas to reduce its number of uranium centrifuges that can produce material that's for nuclear reactor grade or for bomb grade. So they took down about 13,000 centrifuge machines from their 2 facilities. They shipped out of Iran about 8.5 tons of low enriched uranium stock, mainly to Russia. They removed and filled the reactor core of a reactor that could have, once operating, been producing up to 2 bombs worth of plutonium. So that was also taken care of. And they've made taken the steps necessary to allow the International Atomic Energy Agency not just to inspect their declared facilities, but to initiate a much more robust inspection and monitoring system that's going to last for decades to make sure that there are no illicit nuclear activities at the declared facilities or at undeclared facilities. So it's a big step, and all of these measures now having been taken allowed the United States and the EU to lift to lift the sanctions that have been in place, particularly for Iran, relating to the sale of oil and to allow them to engage in banking activities. So this is going to help the Iranian economy, but it's going to take a while for it to have an effect.
Help to the tune of how much? How much money is freed up at this point? What is Iran going to see in the near term and then long term?
Well, with respect to the unfrozen assets, I mean, a lot of Iran's oil assets have been frozen through these UN Security Council imposed sanctions. There are various estimates, but the U.S. Treasury Department has said that the net amount that Iran will receive is around the vicinity of $50 billion immediately. They owe a lot to a lot of other countries for projects, and so they're going to get a net of about $50 billion. But going forward, they're going to be able to sell oil, although the price of oil is depressed right now, so the benefits won't be as high. And President Rouhani of Iran is very much hoping that the lifting of these sanctions will have political benefits. There are elections coming up for the Iranian parliament, the Majlis, in less than a month. So he's hoping that it will help his chances and those of the so-called pragmatists in Iran.
From your perspective at the Arms Control Association, what do you think the implementation of this deal and this process means for non-proliferation efforts throughout the region?
Well, we think this is a huge step forward. We have to remember that just a couple of years ago, Iran was just on the cusp of having enough enriched uranium material for 1 bomb. And they were on track to build this reactor called the Iraq reactor. Once operational, it could have been producing enough material for 2 nuclear weapons. So if not for the interim agreement that was struck in the fall of 2013, and then this final agreement struck in the middle of 2015, Iran today might have had 30,000 centrifuges online, installed, I should say. They might have had this plutonium production reactor operating. They might have had enough low enriched uranium material for as much as 3 nuclear bombs. So, and we wouldn't have had the inspections in place that we have today. So the situation could have been far, far worse. They are substantially, have been substantially moved backwards. The paths for an Iranian nuclear weapon, we believe, are effectively blocked for at least 15 years. These restrictions, some will last 10 years, some 15, some 20, some 25, some forever. So it is a huge step forward. It is a big victory for nuclear nonproliferation, stopping the spread of nuclear weapons.
Seems to think it's a good deal. What could have been done better in this process? What was perhaps left on the table?
Well, it's not a perfect agreement. Of course, there's a lot of criticism here in Washington for what it wasn't. I mean, the two main criticisms, I think, and the two things we would have liked to have seen if we could have written it by ourselves, was that some of the restrictions on Iran's nuclear program, its enrichment activities, might have lasted longer, and second, that they might have been much more substantial. But the goal here was not to eliminate all of Iran's nuclear capacity, to take away their potential for peaceful nuclear activities. That's not something that they would have agreed to, but to put them back enough so that they could not race to produce the material for a bomb in a short enough time so that we couldn't detect them and stop them. Now we have that in place. Their capabilities have been severely restricted. They might have been able to produce enough nuclear material for one nuclear bomb in 2 months, 2 years ago before the negotiations. Today, that time is at least a year, if not more, away. And we have, this is very important, the President spoke about this, we have a very robust inspections system in place that will almost immediately detect any Iranian effort to get around the restrictions of this agreement. And that will allow the international community to respond very quickly, probably well ahead of their ability to amass enough material for just one nuclear weapon. So they're in a box for a long time.
The President spoke about this. He spoke about this yesterday from the White House. Here's a bit from his statement about the agreement, about implementation day.
Of course, even as we implement the nuclear deal and welcome our Americans home, we recognize that there remain profound differences between the United States and Iran. We remain steadfast in opposing Iran's destabilizing behavior elsewhere, including its threats against Israel and our Gulf partners, and its support for violent proxies in places like Syria and Yemen. We still have sanctions on Iran for its violations of human rights, for its support of terrorism, and for its ballistic missile program, and we will continue to enforce these sanctions vigorously. Iran's recent missile test, for example, was a violation of its international obligations. And as a result, the United States is imposing sanctions on individuals and companies working to advance Iran's ballistic missile program. And we are going to remain vigilant about it. We're not going to waver in the defense of our security or that of our allies and partners.
That was President Obama from the White House yesterday. We're going to get into some of those issues, including the ballistic missiles program in Iran, but want to bring our viewers into this conversation as well. Democrats, it's 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Independents, 202-748-8002. We'll start with Patrick in Trenton, New Jersey, line for Republicans. Patrick, go ahead.
Good morning. Yeah, just 2 points. How could the administration deal with Iran with such a heavy hand while letting North Korea run wild? There's special interest at hand there. You know, Iran is next to our gallant little ally in the Middle East, Israel. And I know I see you've been running the Martin Luther King videos this morning. I'd like to wish everyone a happy James Earl Ray Day. That's what it means for the rest of us, the working class. Thank you.
Patrick in Trenton, New Jersey. Do you want to talk about the North Korea aspect?
Well, you mentioned MLK Day. I mean, it's worth noting that Martin Luther King was a strong advocate for ending the nuclear arms race in the 50s and the 60s. That was a problem then. It's in many ways a problem today. But on North Korea, another proliferation threat. You know, the Obama administration has expended a great deal of energy in this successful negotiation to reach the Iran deal. It's been a lot more difficult with respect to North Korea, and we would like to see further engagement with North Korea to begin with, freeze their nuclear program, which is actually quite advanced now. They have been conducting nuclear test explosions, just conducted their fourth earlier this month. They are producing plutonium and highly enriched uranium. The other problem with the North Koreans is that they have a ballistic missile program, and they could soon be able to arm these ballistic missiles, which are short and medium range missiles, with nuclear warheads, especially if they have more nuclear testing to perfect those warheads. So it is important to engage the North Koreans, also to put more pressure on the North Koreans Pressure alone and sanctions alone with North Korea won't do the job, however. It's going to require more Chinese support, number one, for enforcing the existing sanctions. But the North is just not as, North Korea is just not as susceptible to sanctions as Iran was. Iran is quite integrated in the international economic system. North Korea is not. So this is a ticking time bomb. It's already gone off in some ways. It is going to be a problem, North Korea and its nuclear program, for the next president. And it's something that's going to require, I think, a different approach, a more effective approach to curbing their program.
And Mary is in Grand Ledge, Michigan, line for independence. Mary, you're on with Daryl Kimball of the Arms Control Association.
Good morning. I'd like to say a few things. When you get to this nexus, you're just talking about North Korea. There is this nexus between them and Iran. So even if Iran is not enriching, North Korea is. They'll be happy to hand over some of their material. My main point, though, was there's a part of this deal where during the inspection process, the American citizen, the United States, is going to be paying Iran about $1 million a year for them to self-inspect their own military nuclear sites. So, sorry, people, I don't think that's a good use of our taxpayer money, and I think this was a bad deal. Sorry. You guys have a good day.
Daryl Kimball.
Well, the caller brings up a couple of points, important points. First of all, on the inspections issue with the Iran deal, it's the International Atomic Energy Agency that's going to be doing these inspections. And the Director General, Yukiya Amano, just the other day was talking about some of the new tools the agency is going to have, 24/7 real-time monitoring at all of Iran's declared facilities. They're going to have access to, on short notice, any sites that the agency is concerned about that might be involved in non-declared, that is, illicit activity. They're going to have monitoring in place on all of Iran's uranium mines and mills. So the entire nuclear fuel chain is now going to be under the watchful eye of the International Atomic Energy Agency. Their budget is going to be have to increase by about 3 times for their Iran-related work. It is the American taxpayer that's paying about a 20 to 25% portion of the IAEA's total budget for worldwide inspections, including Iran. So it's going to be important for the Congress to continue to support the IAEA so it can do its job in Iran. It's not self-inspections by Iran by any means. I think that's a misinterpretation of this agreement.
I think a big concern among those who are critical of this agreement is those the undeclared sites, the process.
Right.
In your view, the nuclear fuel chain that you talk about, how hard would it be to have a separate nuclear fuel chain that's off the grid?
It would be very tough, in part because you aren't just trying to evade the inspectors at one point in the process. You have to evade the inspectors at several points in the process. So if you are a cheater, the likelihood that you're going to be caught is substantial at each phase. And in the end, you have to calculate that it is quite likely that you are going to be caught well before you can, quote-unquote, benefit from that cheating. So we have to remember, before this diplomatic agreement, the International Atomic Energy Agency was in Iran. They were inspecting the declared facilities. But now they have a much wider and much deeper look into Iran's program. So we are in a much better position to guard against that secret program that Iran could theoretically pursue in order to amass enough material for a nuclear weapon.
Booth Bay Harbor, Maine is up next. Barkley is on our line for Republicans. Barkley, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I have a question about what's happening to all these tons of enriched plutonium that are going to Russia. The question is, why Russia? Number two, what's Russia going to do with it? And it's a little concerning. I haven't heard any discussion of that. The other question I have is, what about this exemption of nuclear testing or production systems in Russian Missouri, in Iranian military bases? Apparently, those are being exempted from inspection. So those are my two questions.
Thanks, Barclay. Daryl Kimball.
Yeah, so as part of this agreement, the Iranians needed to blend down the low-enriched uranium they had to natural uranium or ship out the low-enriched uranium. The quantity we're talking about is about 8.5 tons. To get it down to the 300 kilogram limit that the Iran deal requires. Now, if the Iranians had that whole quantity, they could theoretically use that low-enriched uranium, enrich it further to bring it up to bomb grade. Now they don't have that capability. So one of the ways in which the different parties decided this should be dealt with quickly was to ship out the low-enriched uranium stockpile that Iran had. They sent it to Russia in part because Russia is a huge, has a huge nuclear industry for civilian purposes. They have the capacity to store this material and to use it in their own commercial activities to sell nuclear fuel to nuclear power vendors for electricity production. So that's why it was done that way. It is also geographically convenient for this material to go from Iran to Russia, which is very close by. Now, Russia, we've got to remember, is like the United States, has more nuclear weapons than any other country. They have an enormous fissile material stockpile. That's the material that can be used to make nuclear weapons. So the fact that Russia has 8.5 tons of low-enriched uranium is not a proliferation problem by itself, in part because Russia already has quite a great deal more highly enriched uranium and plutonium in storage inside its country.
Two tweets as we've been having this conversation, two different views of the Iranian nuclear deal. Roger Green writes, this deal was simply a postponement while Obama is still in office. It's all about his legacy, regardless of future costs. And Victor writes, show me any bilateral agreement that was perfect. You won't find any. The Iran deal was the best alternative to a Bigfoot war. We're talking with Daryl Kimball of the Arms Control Association. He's the executive director there. For those that aren't familiar with the Arms Control Association, explain what you do.
Well, we were established in 1971, and our mission is to provide information about what we call the world's most dangerous weapons, nuclear, chemical, biological, and some kinds of conventional weapons. We publish the journal Arms Control today. We're active here in Washington on policy issues, and we work a great deal to try to encourage progress towards a diplomatic solution to prevent a nuclear-armed Iran over the last several years.
And he's taking your calls for about the next 20 minutes or so here on the Washington Journal. Michael is in Alexandria, Virginia, line for Republicans. Michael, good morning.
Yes, good morning. Question for Mr. Kimball. A gentleman called from New Jersey had made a comment about touched on the MLK Day and brought up the James Earl Jr., the gentleman's name there. And I was just wondering why you or the gentleman next to you found those comments not to be something that needed to be denounced. As a United States Marine on active duty and an African American, I found it very offensive that, I turn on TV to watch C-SPAN, find out about the Iran deal, and, these comments just, go by as if nothing was ever mentioned. In fact, it's a backhand comment towards, the rest of the American people and African Americans alike.
Well, Michael, we want to move on away from that comment to talking about the Iran deal. We're actually going to be talking about Martin Luther King Jr. Day in our last half hour here on the Washington Journal. We're going to be talking about the civil rights issues today in this country. We're going to be bringing you live pictures from the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial today as we talk about Martin Luther King Jr.'s legacy in our last half hour. So we'll certainly be celebrating this day in that segment. Daryl Kimball wanted to say something.
John, let me say, I think the caller is right. Those kinds of comments are not appropriate. Martin Luther King was somebody we should all be proud of, and he represents the best of what this country is about. And I take great honor sitting here talking about stopping the spread of nuclear weapons, because that was part of MLK's legacy in addition to justice for all of us Americans.
Appreciate that. James is in Marysville, Washington, line for Independence. James, good morning.
Good morning, guys. I was just wondering, this is a person for Arms Control Association. Why aren't the other countries in the Mideast area, why aren't we trying to control their arms like Israel and Pakistan? I agree with the Iran deal, 100% I agree with it, but why aren't we interested in disarming the rest of the Mideast?
Well, it's a good question. Iran is not the only country that has thought about and pursued nuclear weapons, and there are, in fact, 9 countries that do have nuclear weapons, including Israel, Pakistan, India, the United States, China, Russia, France. I don't think I'm leaving anyone out there. The fact that the Iranian nuclear program has been put in a box now, I think, should give the United States and many other countries in the international community a chance to build on this agreement, to deal with the other nuclear risks that we have. For instance, one of the novel aspects of this agreement is that the Iranians have agreed to a prohibition on any types of experiments that could be used to make nuclear explosive devices. This is what they were suspected of doing about a decade ago. The IAEA had been investigating. We think that they actually did that. That might be a prohibition that other non-nuclear weapon states could adopt to help strengthen the barriers against proliferation. Pakistan and India are nuclear-armed neighbors. These 2 countries could, if there is a conflict, possibly escalate that conflict to the nuclear realm, which would be catastrophic. So there are things that we can do, the United States now can do, now that the Iranian problem is reduced, to advance efforts in other areas of the world to deal with the other nuclear risks, like some of the ones you mentioned.
The editorial board of the New York Times today talking about the Iranian nuclear deal. The headline on their piece this morning, "A Safer World Thanks to the Iran Pact." The editorial board writing, "The deal is a testament to patient diplomacy and President Obama's visionary determination to pursue a negotiated solution to the nuclear threat despite relentless attempts by his political opponents to sabotage the initiative." If you want to read more about the New York Times editorials board's opinion on this, that's in today's paper. We're also taking your calls here for about the next 15 or 20 minutes or so. Daryl Kimball is with the Arms Control Association. Democrats can call in at 202-748-8000. Republicans, 202-748-8001. Independents, 202-748-8002. Tom is in Winston, Montana. Line for Democrats. Tom, good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead, Tom.
I was on that walk with Martin Luther King and Selma, and I'd like all events of this world to be divided between good and bad. It was a good walk. And in high school, we were the rascals that kept the buses running from the Midwest down into Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana, bring black kids up on Midwest farms for 30 days during Memorial Day to Labor Day. And I just want to say that all of this was goodness.
All right, that's Tom in Winston, Montana this morning. Thomas is in Humboldt, Texas. Line for Independence. Thomas, good morning.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, Thomas.
Hey, listen, I wanted to know the difference between the Iran-Contra deal and this deal. And why was the UN inspector of Israel, why did he resign? Thank you.
Well, I'm not quite sure I understand the question, but as many of the viewers know, the Iran-Contra deal was something from some 35 years ago that the Reagan administration was involved in. This is a far different arrangement having to do with Iran's nuclear activities. There's one thing that a previous caller asked about that I wanted to come back to about the inspections that this agreement puts in place. The International Atomic Energy Agency can request a short notice inspection of any Iranian site that they have concerns about. That doesn't mean that they can go in with no notice. That doesn't mean that the Iranians can't make some suggestions about where they can and cannot go because they have certain rights as an inspected party. But what's unique about this agreement is that within 24 hours the Iranians have to respond to that access request. If there is a dispute about how and where the IAEA wants to go. There's a dispute resolution mechanism called the Joint Commission that applies to everything in this agreement, but particularly to these types of inspections. This is unique. This is new. And that Joint Commission is structured in a way that gives a bit more power to the United States and our P5+1 allies to make sure that the Iranians comply. So there are some novel aspects of this that give the International Atomic Energy Agency much faster access than usual under these kinds of circumstances that will keep the pressure on the Iranians to cooperate going forward in the future. But there will be tests of this agreement, including the first time, and there will be some time down the road when the agency wants to see a facility that the Iranians may have not declared as part of their nuclear program.
I want to get your thoughts on the events last week of Iran detaining those 10 sailors and also last month's test of ballistic missiles. Do you think that should have been taken into consideration before the lifting of sanctions?
Well, it's fabulous to see these dual nationals, these Americans, released from Iran. It's a tremendous relief, and it's a testament to the hard work and the behind-the-scenes diplomacy that the United States was engaged in all the while the nuclear negotiations were going on. And even though there wasn't a direct relationship, I think the diplomatic opening that the nuclear negotiations provided created some channels for communication and some goodwill between the United States and the Iranian government under President Rouhani that helped make this release possible. Now, you mentioned the ballistic missile problem, and just yesterday the President announced that there were some designations, as they're called, on Iranian entities involved in ballistic missile procurement. It's important to remember that this negotiation on Iran's nuclear program led to a nuclear deal. And both sides were very careful not to allow other issues to come into the equation, in part because it would have, they both thought, made it far too complex, far too burdensome in order to resolve the core nuclear issue. But Iran has a ballistic missile program. It has had that program for some time. They have short and medium-range ballistic missiles armed with conventional warheads. The United States and the rest of the international community has been concerned that those missiles could be used, if Iran had a nuclear program, to deliver nuclear warheads. They would be far, 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 far more dangerous with a nuclear warhead. So there have been sanctions in place for some time to make sure that the Iranians can't advance that program. So the sanctions that the President announced yesterday apply to those ballistic missile activities and any trade that might occur on nuclear ballistic missiles between Iran and North Korea. And one of the designations yesterday related to an Iranian company that had Iranian individuals that had been to North Korea apparently to help the North Koreans with their missile program. So there are going to be disputes. There are going to be more sanctions outside of the nuclear realm that take place over the next several years. And we're going to have to pursue a comprehensive approach, I think, to deal with the ballistic missile challenge in the Middle East that Iran poses and other countries in the region pose. But everything, I don't think, could have been solved with the nuclear deal. That's just far too much to expect, and it could have made the conclusion of the negotiation impossible.
Butler, Indiana is up next. Walter's waiting on our line for Republicans. Walter, good morning.
Hey, good morning. Thank you for taking my call. I do appreciate it. Sir, I'm totally befuddled, and when I hear proponents that say, well, it's a pretty good deal, well, it's going to stop the Iranians for X amount of time, I refer back to history, and I refer back to thinking about how when they tried to appease the Germans, and they said, well, if you please stop and you don't do this, we'll be nice, and let's all be nice, kumbaya. When you have a country that, according to the United States, is a state sponsor of terror, and they're on a state sponsor of terror, when the leaders of Iran, after the deal is signed, say that the great Satan, that the Zion government of the United States, death to America, when they shoot ballistic missiles, when missiles fall within 1,500 yards of our ships, when they capture our Navy men and make them put their hands on their head and kneel into position, and we give them $150 billion to a state that will continue to do terrorist activities, I often refer back to the weak-minded liberal Democrats that just try to appease and try to make everything nice. And I just say that all we've done is we've legitimatized, if that's a word, this terroristic country. And until what I want to know is, if you have a president that makes a deal and they say the Americans made the deal, I don't understand. I don't remember the Congress or the Senate or the House of Representatives or anybody in this country having anything to do with it, except for these pinheads that go like John Kerry, and they say, oh, well, we're going to make a great deal in this snapback inspections. So let me ask you a question. What does the Iranian government have to do for the United States to say, well, the United States say we're not going to take this? And I'm just left with that, and I wish you a pleasant day, and God bless you. And
Mr. Kimball.
Well, the Iranian government is very unpleasant, and we got a lot of problems with the Iranians on a lot of fronts. But you know, we had a problem, we still have a problem, but it's less of a problem, which is the possibility of Iran armed with nuclear weapons. So, you know, from my perspective, you know, the caller mentioned a lot of the issues we have with the Iranian government, a lot of the problems. I think we're in a far better position with Iran not having engaging in those behaviors and having the possibility of nuclear weapons. You know, the United States has historically negotiated with countries that we've got severe disagreements with. John F. Kennedy did it. Ronald Reagan did it with the Soviets. I think the George W. Bush administration started talks with Iran several years ago before the Obama administration continued. I think in the end we have an outcome that is clear in our interest, because Iran's program is set back. We should not trust them. This deal is not set up in such a way as to believe everything they say. It is a distrust and verify kind of arrangement. And as I was saying before, we've got much better tools in place through the International Atomic Energy Agency and our own intelligence tools to make sure that the Iranians are not trying to get around the restrictions. So, you know, there are a lot of nasty characters in the world, and sometimes in diplomacy you have to confront them and deal with them and come up with solutions that are not perfect but meet our bottom line security goals.
Daryl Kimball is with the Arms Control Association. It's armscontrol.org if you want to read more about their group, or follow them on Twitter at armscontrolnow. We have about 10 minutes left in this segment. Mark in Chantilly, Virginia, line for Democrats is up next. Mark, good morning.
Yes, good morning. I just want to agree with your guest and with some of the more rational callers who've called in this morning that this is a good deal. Is it perfect? Of course not. No international agreement is perfect. You don't always get everything that you want. That's just not the way the world works. But the world today is safer than it was before this deal. And people who think otherwise are thinking with their guts and not with their heads. What's the alternative? Go to war with Iran to keep them from developing nuclear weapons? No, that's not an option. So people just need to realize that this is the way that negotiations work. It's a good thing. Thank you.
Well, and that captures my sentiments. I think it's a very succinct, good way of putting it. We've got some challenges ahead with this agreement, and I just wanted to mention a couple before we run out of time that I think people need to be looking at. One is that the Congress is going to be taking a look at whether to pass the Iran Sanctions Act, which is the piece of legislation that helped put a lot of the pressure on Iran, that helped bring it to the negotiating table. They're thinking about doing that in order to give the president the ability, if Iran violates this agreement, to snap back those sanctions even faster. There are those who think that that would be useful. There are those who think that that could invite an equal and opposite response from Iran. So that's one issue that the Congress is going to be debating. That's going to be a test for this agreement. The other test for this agreement is going to be, when the IAEA goes in to take a look at a site that the Iranians would rather they not look at, and how will the Iranians respond? How will the United States and our allies respond? That will be a test. That might not come in the coming year, but I think that test is going to come. In addition, we need to make sure that the IAEA has the tools necessary to do the job. They're going to be putting in about 150 people in Iran. They've got a lot of equipment that they have to maintain and operate. That's going to cost money. The United States is the major donor to the IAEA, and we need to sustain that commitment. They're using a lot of the technology that our national labs have created. So this deal is not done. There are many years to go. There are many tests that will take place, and we got to keep our eye on the ball.
Clinton Township, Michigan is up next. David is on our line for Democrats. David, good morning.
Good morning. I wanted to correct the caller 2 callers ago that $1.5 billion is not our money. That is not U.S. taxpayer money. That was Iranian money that was frozen, I don't know how long ago, years ago or even a decade ago. That was Iranian money that was frozen. Now that they have complied with certain things we want, we are releasing their money back to them. Also, those 2 boats, they were in Iranian water. Any country on earth has the right to intercept a ship that is in their water and question the crew. Our country would have done the same thing. Okay, they were in Iranian water. These people on the right will lead us to World War III.
That's David in Clinton Township. Steve on Twitter has a question for you. Wants to know when the Iranian deal will be transformed into the Iranian treaty.
Well, I think what the question might refer to is the fact that many on Capitol Hill wanted this agreement to be submitted to Congress in the form of a treaty, a binding, legally binding agreement. It will not. It was not. This was a formally called an executive agreement. It was negotiated by the permanent members of the Security Council with Iran to make sure that Iran met its UN Security Council requirements. But the Congress did have, in effect, a vote on this agreement. I mean, they did have the opportunity to vote up or down under legislation that was put forward by Senator Bob Corker, chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. The opponents of the agreement did not muster a sufficient number of votes to stop the agreement. So I think one of the things that we all need to think about at this stage is, now that there has been substantial debate in Congress about this, the deal is implemented, what can and should the next president do? There's some on the campaign trail who are saying, I will rip up this agreement day one of when I come in. I think we got to really think about what that means, whether that's feasible, whether that's a good idea. Now that these severe restrictions on Iran's program are in place, what would you put in place instead of the Iran nuclear agreement? I think we're past the stage where we can and should debate whether this should go forward. Now I think it's a question of what's the best way to implement this? How can we build upon it? How can we make sure that Iran complies? And what else do we need to do to deal with Iran's behavior in the region? And how do we develop better diplomatic channels with the Iranians to deal with problems like the prisoners swap that we just saw?
Just a couple minutes left with Daryl Kimball of the Arms Control Association. Ann is in Coleman, Alabama. Line for Republicans. Ann, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Go ahead, Ann. Ann, just turn down your TV and go ahead with your question.
Okay. I was calling, the Iran deal is just leading up to the global domination of the West. Hillary and Bill are members of the PLO, And I want you to read the book, Israel, America's Key to Survival. This will open America's eyes to what's going on with the immigration deal, and the Iran deal is just the beginning.
That's Ann in Coleman, Alabama. Is there anything you wanted to talk to about that? One last question before we go. Want to understand what happens 10 or 15 years from now. Some concern that a nuclear Iran is assured because of this deal. What are your thoughts at the Arms Control Association?
Well, 10 or 15 years down the road, there aren't too many things that are assured. I mean, one thing that is assured is that for the next 10 to 15 years, Iran's capacity to produce highly enriched uranium or plutonium for nuclear weapons is severely constrained. They're only going to have 5,000 first-generation centrifuges for 10 years. They can conduct only limited research on more advanced machines. They can't enrich beyond the 3.67 level, which is normal reactor grade. There's going to be, for 15 years, there are severe limits on their work on spent fuel reprocessing, which you need for plutonium separation to make nuclear weapons out of plutonium. And there's going to be this IAEA monitoring at uranium mills and uranium mining sites for 20, 25 years. And then there'll be other inspections beyond that. So it's going to be very tough for Iran before 15 years to expand their program again. One of the key things, I think, is going to be, will the Russians and other countries continue to supply, as they will be in the near term, Iran with the nuclear fuel that Iran needs for its legitimate nuclear energy production? If they have those fuel supply arrangements, there is no need for Iran to increase its uranium enrichment capacity. So there are some things that we can be doing to head off Iran's rationale and its technical need for increasing its capacity 10, 15 years down the road. We also need to be looking at ways in which we can keep them in the box by on the nuclear issue, by making sure that other countries in the region are part of the nuclear non-proliferation system and the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty to prevent the nuclear testing you need to develop nuclear warheads. So there are several things we need to be thinking about as we look down the roads, and the next administration is going to be saddled with those tasks, and it's going to be one of their more important tasks.
Daryl Kimball with the Arms Control Association, the Executive Director there. Always appreciate your time.